Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today, we're tackling something that sounds simple, but has surprising layers, using oral reading to boost your English learning.
That's right.
We've got quite a range of material here, some theory about how we learn languages, some really practical classroom examples too.
Yeah, lots to dig into.
And our goal, our mission for this deep dive is really to pull out the actionable insights for you, the listener. We want to show you why and how reading aloud can actually be a powerful tool for your English.
Exactly. We're going beyond just, making sounds. We'll look at how it engages your brain, how it fits into these successful learning strategies.
And the real advantages it offers for different skills, right?
Precisely. Real advantages.
Okay, let's jump right in. First big point. Oral reading, it's not as simple as it looks, is it?
Not at all. When you read aloud, your brain is doing, well, a lot simultaneously.
Yeah, one of the sources breaks it down into 4 stages happening at once. You're seeing the letters,
So recognition, yep.
processing the words, the vocabulary, then turning those letters into sounds.
Phonological encoding, that's the term.
Right. And then the big one, making sense of it all. The grammar, the meaning, how it all connects.
Exactly. Syntax, semantics, the whole picture. So yeah, you're juggling visual input, vocabulary lookup, sound creation, and deep understanding all at the same time.
It's a real cognitive workout.
Yeah.
That's maybe the first key thing to grasp.
It really is. And for English learners, that phonological part, turning print into sound, sometimes called the phonological mediation route, that's particularly important.
How so?
Well, think of it like internally sounding out words to get their meaning. Many learners do this, but the process can be kind of slow.
Right, I can see that. You read a word, you maybe silently sound it out, maybe even mentally translate it.
Yeah, that pause, that translation step.
But the interesting point one source makes is that reading aloud sort of forces your hand, doesn't it? You don't really have time for that internal detour.
Exactly. You're compelled to read more directly, to process the meaning as you go. It pushes for a more immediate connection.
And speeds up that crucial sound-to-meaning link you mentioned.
Precisely. It encourages speeding that up.
Okay. Now, the next thing links oral reading to a framework for language learning, something called IPOM. Can you break that down?
Sure. IPOM. It stands for input processing, practice, output, which means actually producing language, and metacognitive monitoring.
Okay, 4 key elements.
Right. Considered pretty essential for successful foreign language learning. And what's really fascinating is how oral reading training can support, actually boost each of these areas.
All right, let's unpack that, starting with the I input processing. How does reading aloud make you a better reader? We touched on the speed thing.
Yes, exactly. Speeding up that phonological encoding, the decoding of sounds, directly helps you understand what you're reading faster.
Makes sense. Less effort on the decoding leaves more brain power for meaning.
Precisely. And we have some actual data on this from one source. It shows that students who did consistent oral reading practice significantly improved their reading speed words per minute compared to groups who didn't.
Oh, really? Like how much?
Well, in one comparison, it went from about 68.5 words per minute to 70.1. Okay, a small jump. But in another, it was much bigger, from around 110 WPM up to almost 130 POBM.
Wow, that's quite a leap, from 110 to nearly 130.
Yeah, so it's not just theory. The practice demonstrably makes reading faster, and by implication, smoother comprehension.
That's compelling. So a real foundational impact on reading efficiency. Okay, let's move to the P in IPOM practice. How does reading aloud help with memory? Something about working memory and a phonological loop.
That's the one. So think of working memory as your brain's temporary scratch pad for stuff you're actively using.
Okay.
And a key part is this phonological loop. It's got 2 bits. A short-term store for sounds, kind of like an inner ear, and an inner voice for mental repetition.
An inner voice.
Now, here's the interesting bit. Auditory info stuff you hear goes straight into this loop. But visual info, like written words, your brain usually converts it into that sound-based code first. It uses that inner voice.
Ah, so even when reading silently, there's often an internal sounding out happening.
Often, yes. But here's the catch. Information in that loop fades really quickly, like seconds. Unless
you repeat it.
Exactly, unless you rehearse it. And that's where oral reading comes in powerfully. By actually speaking the words, especially aiming for correct pronunciation, you're providing that crucial repetition within the phonological loop.
So you're strengthening the trace, making it stick.
You got it.
Yeah.
That consistent, accurate repetition, the practice, helps internalize the new language items, moving them towards long-term memory.
So it's not just hearing myself, it's actively embedding it.
Cool. Okay, what about O for output? How does reading aloud improve speaking? Seems a bit indirect since you're not making up the words.
It might seem indirect at first glance, but think about the actual process of speaking. There's conceptualization, figuring out what to say, then verbalization, turning thoughts into words, and finally articulation, physically making the sounds.
Right, 3 stages. Oral reading bypasses the first one, the conceptualization, because the text provides the content, but it directly practices the other 2, verbalization and articulation, over and over again.
You're exercising those specific speaking muscles, essentially.
Precisely. And one study mentioned in our sources found something really neat. They had students do what they called acting out reading.
Acting out reading, what's that?
It means reading the text, but substituting proper nouns and pronouns with yourself, making it personal. So instead of John went to the store, you read, I went to the store.
Ah, okay, putting yourself in the text.
Yeah, and those students scored significantly higher on speaking tests compared to students who just did regular oral reading.
That's fascinating. So that personalization really cranks up the speaking benefit.
It seems to. It makes it feel more like rehearsing real communication, bridging that gap between just reading words and actually using them.
So how do we maximize this output effect then? Make oral reading really count for speaking?
Well, a key recommendation across the sources is combining it with listening to model audio, a native speaker recording.
Why is that so important?
Because learners, and one source specifically mentions Japanese learners of English, can sometimes develop, let's say, 2 different mental representations for a word. How it looks written down and how it actually sounds when spoken. They might not match up perfectly.
I can definitely see that happening. You read a word one way in your head for ages.
So you hear it pronounced correctly, and it's like, oh. So doing lots of oral reading while listening helps integrate those written and spoken forms. Connect the dots.
Makes total sense. What's the best way to structure that practice? Just play audio while reading along.
The suggestion is more towards a listen and repeat format. Critically, the audio needs pauses after phrases or sentences.
Pauses are key.
Absolutely. That pause gives you that vital moment to process what you heard, look at the text, and then try to replicate the sound, the intonation, the rhythm yourself. Just listening continuously while trying to read simultaneously often doesn't allow for that processing and imitation.
Got it. Listen, pause, process, repeat it aloud.
Okay, we've covered input, practice, output. That leaves M, metacognitive monitoring. Sounds a bit academic. What is it really?
Yeah, it sounds complex, but it's actually quite simple. In this context, it's just your ability to kind of step back and notice your own learning. Are you getting it? Where are you struggling? Are your study methods working?
Self-awareness about your learning process.
Exactly. And oral reading inherently involves this, especially for pronunciation, because you're listening to yourself speak.
So you become your own pronunciation checker, in a way.
Pretty much.
Yeah.
As you read aloud repeatedly, you start noticing, I always stumble on that word, or my rhythm sounds a bit off there. This self-monitoring is crucial for identifying weaknesses and then hopefully adjusting what you're doing. Developing that ability to self-correct. Okay. Now, something else that comes up is the difference between oral reading and shadowing. People sometimes confuse them.
Yeah, they do seem similar on the surface, and they share some features. Both use language input, both involve forming sound representations and speaking them out, and both need quick, simultaneous processing.
But they're not the same.
No. The core difference is the input mode. Shadowing is purely auditory. You echo what you hear.
Like a parrot.
Kind of, yeah. Oral reading's main input is visual you read aloud from text. You might listen to, like in listen and repeat, but the text is primary.
So shadowing is more tied to listening skills?
Generally, yes. It's strongly linked to improving listening comprehension and processing speed for spoken language. Oral reading, starting from print, connects more directly to improving reading skills.
And you mentioned pauses earlier. Shadowing usually doesn't have those, right? It's continuous?
Correct. Shadowing audio is typically continuous, often with slightly easier material. Oral reading, especially listen and repeat, benefits from those pauses and can handle more challenging texts.
That distinction is helpful. You know, digging even deeper, our sources mention neurological benefits, brain stuff.
They do. It's quite exciting, actually. Brain imaging studies, fMRI and the like, have shown that oral reading really lights up the brain.
Lights it up how?
Well, Professor Ryuta Kawashima from Tohoku University is quoted in one source. Based on their research, he states that oral reading activates more areas of the brain than any other task they studied.
Wow. more than anything else. That's a huge claim.
Is it a powerful statement? The implication for learning is pretty clear.
Which is?
That even just doing, say, 2 to 5 minutes of oral reading at the start of a study session could potentially, wake up your brain, improve memory consolidation, just get you into a more receptive state for learning.
Like a mental warm-up that activates everything.
Interesting. Okay, so knowing all these benefits, how does this actually play out in practice? In classrooms, for instance. It can't just be course reading all the time.
Oh, definitely not. Good teachers know it needs variety. While it's widely recognized, effective instruction goes way beyond simple repetition. The real skill is tailoring and combining different types of oral reading practice to match specific goals.
Like what? What kinds of variations are there?
Well, the sources list a ton, everything from basic repeating, maybe with different pause lengths, to focus on pronunciation versus rhythm,
Okay.
to things like read and look up and say, you read a bit, look away, try to say it from memory, good for memorization.
Ah, I've heard of that one.
And there's buzz reading, where everyone reads softly to themselves, good for individual checking without pressure. Backup repeating for tackling long, tricky sentences by starting at the end and working backwards in chunks.
Backup repeating. Never heard of that. Yeah. And for speaking, things like pair reading, maybe English translation reading, even grammar gets reinforced with fill-in-the-blank reading. And to get everyone involved, an oral reading relay.
That's a huge toolkit. It sounds like you could design a whole lesson around just these techniques.
You absolutely could. And the sources even offer examples called 8 recipes for oral reading instruction by purpose.
Recipes, like cooking.
Huh, sort of. They're examples of how to sequence and combine different techniques for a specific outcome. Like a recipe for pronunciation might mix focused repetition, listening, and maybe some shadowing.
What are the rules for these recipes?
General guidelines are things like focus more repetition on the important parts of the text, keep the text difficulty manageable, that I+1 idea, just slightly challenging, and vary the amount of repetition based on student needs.
Makes sense. Can you give an example of a recipe?
Sure. For, say, deepening comprehension, a recipe might involve reading silently first, then maybe paired reading where students discuss meaning, followed by backup repeating for complex sentences to really unpack the structure. For speaking, maybe start with basic repetition, then move to that acting out reading, the or you wean, and finish with a paired activity where they adapt the text.
These recipes really highlight how intentional you can be with oral reading. It's not just random.
Not at all. Very targeted.
And we have some actual school examples too, right?
Yes. Tokyo Seitoku Fukaya High School is mentioned. Their focus is explicitly on making English speakable through memorization and writing, and repeated oral reading in class is their core method for achieving that memorization.
And they use specific materials.
Yeah, things like Shin-Yumatan with CDs used in morning study and for final checks. Interestingly, they tell students to memorize the text, not just read it, shifting the mindset.
That reframing is interesting. Memorize implies a deeper goal. Any other examples?
There's mention of an English exercise class using original handouts with varied oral reading activities designed to help students internalize usage examples naturally, almost without thinking about grammar rules explicitly. They also aim for quick Japanese to English responses using audio prompts.
Building that automaticity, it's clear these schools see real value in getting students to actively voice the language. What about teacher perspectives?
Also insightful. We hear about Yohei Inoue, a teacher who apparently really discovered the power and, importantly, the enjoyment of varied oral reading techniques after trying them.
So it can be engaging, not just drudgery.
Exactly. And Maruyama Sensei, whose classes focus on strong foundations, vocab, grammar, reading comprehension in Japanese first, which then allows for extensive reading later. One of his students apparently excelled in English debate. He also uses dictation from the textbook for listening practice.
Solid foundational work.
Then there's this concept from Koshishi's study, subjective oral reading.
Subjective oral reading, what does that mean?
It means being consciously aware of the sentence structure and the meaning as you are reading aloud. Not just decoding sounds, but actively thinking about, okay, that's the subject, that's the verb, this phrase tells me where.
Thinking about the language itself while speaking it.
Precisely. Koshishi's research tried to find ways to encourage this deeper, more conscious reading aloud and see if it helped.
And did it?
The finding was interesting. Explicitly teaching sentence structures seemed to help students adopt this subjective approach if they kept practicing. Just telling them to be more aware without that structural teaching wasn't very effective.
So understanding the structure enables that conscious reading aloud. Fascinating link. Okay, wow, we have covered a lot of ground on oral reading. To sort of wrap things up, can you recap the main benefits we've hit on?
Sure. So, big picture. It improves reading speed and comprehension by tuning that sound processing part of your brain. It helps cement things in memory via the phonological loop and repetition. It boosts speaking skills by exercising verbalization and articulation, especially with techniques like personalization. It develops metacognitive awareness. You learn to monitor your own pronunciation and understanding. And remarkably, it activates large parts of your brain.
And the overarching message seems to be, it's not just about reading words out loud, is it?
Not at all. The real power comes from understanding its complexity and using a variety of techniques, consciously chosen for specific learning goals. It's about being intentional.
Moving beyond just mechanical repetition.
Exactly. Tapping into your voice to engage with English on many levels.
So for you listening, the encouragement is to think about how you might bring more conscious and varied oral reading into your own study. Don't just read silently all the time.
Try speaking the words. Listen to yourself. Maybe try some of those techniques we mentioned, like making it personal.
Which leads us to a final thought to leave you with.
Yeah, something to ponder. What if the key to unlocking fluency lies not just in passive absorption, but in the active engagement of your own voice? What new connections, what deeper understanding might you forge by truly speaking the language you are learning?